fellow Amazonians. The subject of this presentation I bring to you today is the dates and days of infamy in the history of the southern Cameroons, Amazonia. Every country has dates and days of infamy which stand out in its history. These dates and days of infamy are dark moments in a country's history that must never be forgotten. When it comes to the southern Cameroons, Amazonia, some of the darkest moments in its history are days and dates bunched together in 1961 and then in 1972. Amazonia's dates and days of infamy, they are as follows. Number 1, February 11 of 1961, the day of the so-called plebiscite. And then July 17 to 21, 1961, with a misguided Fumban conference. And then, of course, we have October 1st of 1961, our Independence Day, the day we all celebrate today. And then, of course, May 20, 1972 referendum. Let us now take a walk down memory lane into these dates and events so that we can fully come to the understanding of how and why we got where we are today. We call February 11, 1961 a day of infamy because it was the day that the British conspired with the United Nations to conduct an illegal plebiscite in southern Cameroons rather than grant full independence as stipulated in United Nations Resolution 1608. This plebiscite was illegal because when the League of Nations was abolished on April 20, 1946, the remaining League of Nations mandates were transformed into trust territories administered through the United Nations Trusteeship Council. The British Southern Cameroons, as a result, became a trust territory administered by Great Britain, and the British rule over the southern Cameroons was under the supervision of the Trusteeship Council. Under the trusteeship mandate, all what Britain was required to do, listen to me carefully, all that the British were required to do was to prepare the southern Cameroons, their trust territory, transition to independence. In fact, the United Nations Trusteeship Council was made to ensure, ladies and gentlemen, that every trust territory eventually gained its independence. That was what happened with French Cameroon in 1960, and that was what happened with other British colonies and trust territories, with the exception of the southern Cameroons. Before the wind of independence that swept across the continent, very early in the 1960s, the British ensured that the southern Cameroons had a viable economy from the mid-60s. Indeed, the economy and political governing system of the southern Cameroons were more established than that of other colonies and trust territories in all of sub-Saharan Africa. The CDC, for example, the Commonwealth Development Corporation, as it was known then, provided a robust economy per capita. And there were two democratic elections in the 1950s that led to a peaceful transfer of power from Dr. E.M.L. Ndele to John Gu Foncha. This was evidence of a people ready to be independent. However, for some reason, which Britain has never fully explained and has never taken responsibility for, Britain went against her trusteeship mandate, never prepared, nor allowed the Southern Cameroons to gain unfettered independence, just as Ghana, Nigeria, and others in the sub-region were getting. Britain's claim so far was that the Southern Cameroons was not economically viable to be an independent country. But if indeed that was the case, what then was Britain doing during the transition period from 1946 to 1960, when it was supposed to prepare the Trust Territory, the Southern Cameroons, for independence? The claim can only be said to be bogus. Yes, bogus. This was jaw-dropping because the excuse they gave contradicted reality on the ground, and Britain knew it. At that time, the Southern Cameroon's economy was more robust than that of East or French Cameroon. For example, the Southern Cameroons had more functioning seaports and airports than in French or East Cameroon. Also, one point that is often left out is the fact that because of political persecution beginning in 1956, Bassa and Bamileke refugees were streaming into the Southern Cameroons. The Bassas were already flooding the CDC as laborers. So, this begs for the question, how then was it that a territory that was already absorbing and protecting refugees and abiding by international norms was said to be not to be ready for independence? How was that possible? It is mind-boggling, to say the least. The biggest fraud with the plebiscite is the fact that Southern Cameroons was given only the option to gain independence by joining. You either join Nigeria or you join East or French Cameroon, both of which already obtained their independence in 1960. This was totally illegal. The very idea, ladies and gentlemen, that we will gain independence by joining was a breach of the terms of the United Nations Trusteeship Agreement, as well as the fact that a country does not gain independence by joining another country. It doesn't happen that way. Now let's take a look at another day of infamy, ladies and gentlemen. The so-called Fumban Conference. The Fumban Conference of July 17 to the 21st in 1961. With no other option left on the table for the Southern Cameroon's total sovereignty, total independence, the Foncha administration opted to join French Cameroon with a hope they will negotiate the terms of a federal state based on equal status. That led to the misguided Fumban Conference. In preparation for the conference, Foncha and his associate met in Bamenda in June of 1961, but really never produced a robust agenda of their own. They only agreed that they will attend the Fumban conference. Now listen to me carefully now. The purpose of the Fumban conference was to create a constitution for the new federal state of the British Southern Cameroons and East or French Cameroon. In the minds of Foncha and his delegation, Fumban was going to be the fix to the plebiscite. It was their second chance indeed. But did it really happen? Did it matter? Of course not. Let me state this and here, and I choose my words very, very carefully. The purpose of Fumban was to create a constitution and not to accept a constitution as tabled by East Cameroon or French Cameroon, to the surprise of Foncha and his own delegation in Fumban. Ladies and gentlemen, that the conference was a total failure and had nothing to show for it is exemplified by the absence of any genuine agreements and documentation from that conference. There have been all sorts of claims, mostly by La République du Cameroun, regarding the fake union between our two countries. I'm referring to the Southern Cameroons and French Cameroon. The conference was supposed to hold for 5 days, from July 17 to July 21, 1961. However, on the first day of the conference, the delegates met and greeted each other and set the agenda. The proceedings were slow due to difficulties in translation. On day number 2 of the conference, there was a surprise. Amadou Ahidjo, president and leader of the French Cameroon delegation, took full control of the conference and said that both delegations from his country and from Southern Cameroons should retreat and form committees and return on day number 5, the last day of the conference. Ladies and gentlemen, the committees were assigned to deliberate on various aspects of the constitution of the new country. According to some sources, Bobe Jua was very furious about this development and demanded to know why Foncha was just going along with everything whatsoever that the East Cameroon delegation put on the table. Jua argued and maintained that it was not enough to allow only 1 day of deliberations on various aspects of the Constitution. Dr. Emmanuel Indele warned, ladies and gentlemen, and I quote, "Too much haste would have far-reaching consequences on the people of the Cameroons," end of quote. Ngom Jua screamed at Foncha, and I quote, "I have never seen people expected to write a constitution in 2 days," end of quote. Unfortunately, all these agitations didn't move a stone. They changed nothing. Thus, when the delegations returned on day number 5, the last day of the conference, during the opening speech, Amadou Ahidjo staged a coup and announced that the East Cameroon delegation was very happy that their brothers from west of the Mongol have agreed to join their brothers east of the Mongol. That was a coup. My own words. Ahidjo's declaration triggered speculations that Foncha had within day 3 and day 4, during the retreat, the conference, met secretly with Ahidjo. The reason for Ahidjo's declaration. So far, that has remained a speculation, as no documents or other evidence have been provided to support the claim. Ladies and gentlemen, after making the statement that their brothers from west of the Mongol have agreed to join their brothers east of the Mongol, Ahidjo then tabled a pre-written constitution. Again, Ahidjo tabled a pre-written constitution. That is, his own delegation had come with it, ignoring any input or amendments from Foncha's delegation. He asked Foncha to endorse it as the constitution to be adopted by the new federation. Thank God, Foncha refused to endorse it. First and foremost, both delegations depended on translators to follow or understand what was being said or discussed. After Ahidjo spoke, he did not even allow the Southern Cameroons delegation to make its own remarks or speech. Rather, he tabled their East Cameroon constitution and asked Foncha to sign. According to secret notes, Augustin Jewel was so furious, so unhappy with Foncha's naivety, that he called upon the Southern Cameroon's delegation to immediately storm out of the conference hall. But cooler heads prevailed, so they thought. Foncha declined. Again, Foncha declined to endorse the pro-France East Cameroon French Cameroon Constitution, and instead verbally agreed that the two countries experiment the federal system and then revisit it. Listen, revisit it after 30 years. Ladies and gentlemen, some historians have written about this 30-year trial or transition period. But there is absolutely no documentation and or signed agreement whatsoever as evidence. Actually, there is no evidence that any binding agreements were signed at the Fumban conference. None that we have seen at all. The United Nations has none. Britain has none. France has none. La République du Cameroon, they have none. Zero. Indeed, if it did, the Yaoundé regime would have been flaunting it at the United Nations, but they have flaunted nothing. Before their deaths, no member of the Southern Cameroon's delegation ever produced any legally binding document that came out of the Fumban conference. They produced none. Verbal commitments have no legality, ladies and gentlemen, especially when the parties involved really do not owe each other anything. At the time in 1961, Southern Cameroons did not owe La République du Cameroon anything, and vice versa. Therefore, the absence of any legally binding agreements is evidence that the Fumban conference had zero consequences. Again, zero consequences on the future of the Southern Cameroons. Any claims being made by the Yaoundé regime are absolutely baseless and totally irrelevant. So ladies and gentlemen, Fumban was essentially a travesty, a high-sounding nothing. The next day of infirmity was October 1, 1961, the day we all celebrate today as our Independence Day. On April 21, 1961, United Nations Resolution 1608 set October 1, 1961 as a date of independence for the Southern Cameroons. But there are many mind-boggling questions here, ladies and gentlemen. Come to think about it. Which comes first? April or July? Which one comes first? Of course, April comes first. If on April 21, 1961, UN Resolution 1608 set October 1, 1961 as the date of independence for the Southern Cameroons, what then was the purpose of the Fumban Conference, which came in July 1961? Why did Britain not make it clear and insist that the Fumban Conference was irrelevant, since the Southern Cameroons was set for its independence on October 1, 1961? Does that make sense? If La République du Cameroun, French Cameroon, now claims that the Southern Cameroons gained independence by joining them after the plebiscite on February 11, 1961, what was the point of granting another independence on October 1, 1961? How many times does a country has to gain independence in order to be independent? Fellow Amazonians, we all know that Southern Cameroons gained independence on October 1, 1961, because there are pictures of celebrations and festivities, particularly at Centenary Stadium in Victoria and in Bamenda. In fact, Akere Muna once showed a framed picture of him, a young star then, and his father, S.T. Muna, during Independence Day celebrations. The Southern Cameroons Independence Day celebrations. As a matter of fact, East Cameroon sent members of the Ahidjo administration to Buea for Independence Day celebration, ladies and gentlemen. What remains a mystery is the fact that after independence on October 1, 1961, the Southern Cameroons never functioned. It never functioned as a full independent nation state. And that is why you don't see the flag of the Southern Cameroons at the United Nations. It was still large to La République du Cameroun, in spite of the fact that nothing piece of paper bound them together. No piece of paper bound them together up to today. The referendum of May 20, 1972 was another day of infamy and a major turning point in the relationship between the Southern Cameroons and La République du Cameroun. It marked the start of full-fledged annexation, assimilation, and marginalization of the Southern Cameroons. It was a day of mourning, a day of pain. Dictionary.com defines a referendum thus, and I quote, a vote by the electorate on a single political question which has been referred to them for a direct decision, and end of quote. So then, let us carefully examine some aspects of that definition. Who was the electorate? Of course, we know the electorate was the Southern Cameroons. Therefore, the referendum should not have been administered in La République du Cameroon. It was not their political fate, ladies and gentlemen. Again, it was not their political fate that was to be decided. It should have been limited to the southern Cameroons, because it was the fate of the southern Cameroons that was to be decided. What was the single political question? The single political question at hand was abolition of the federal system. It was fatally flawed, because the only opinion the electorate had was to vote yes, nothing else. Vote yes, nothing else. No other option. Who was the umpire or the referee over the question, over the vote? Very interesting question, isn't it? It was not the Southern Cameroon's parliament. No, not even the House of Chiefs. Of course not. Not even the people through street protests. It was imposed by Amadou Ahidjo with the complicity of France. Why was France so heavily vested in this referendum? This is where the crux of the matter lies, ladies and gentlemen. Pre-independence agreement and the discovery of oil offshore in Victoria, ladies and gentlemen, as a condition for gaining independence. La République du Cameroon, under the tutelage of Amadou Ahidjo, signed an indemnification agreement with France. The secret agreement with France between French Cameroon and the French, they were signed on December 31, 1958, and included agreements in the areas of military and financial cooperation, cultural affairs, administrative relations, civil aeronautics, military assistance, and consular and legal conventions. The treaties were expanded by the Franco-Cameroonian Treaty of November 13, 1960. The agreement compelled, which means forced French Cameroon, La République du Cameroon, to deposit at least 85% of its foreign reserves at the French treasury. There was also the August 8, 1961 Accord on higher education, the tax agreements of July 10, 1965, and the special Franco-Cameroonian agreements of February 21, 1974. Up to the mid-1990s, Cameroon postage stamps, ladies and gentlemen, were still printed but in France. International phone calls to and from Cameroon had to go through France for an extra fee. Goods to and from overseas had also to go through French seaports for extra taxation to benefit France. Air France had exclusive monopoly over airports in Cameroon. Machinery and spare parts were to be imported exclusively from France too. These agreements, ladies and gentlemen, provided France with unlimited privilege and advantage in the conduct of the affairs of La République du Cameroon. And some of those privileges remain to date. As we saw last week, when the French embassy in Yaoundé announced that it was strengthening its military cooperation with La République du Cameroon following devastating casualties suffered by terrorist Cameroon soldiers in the hands of Ambazonia restoration forces. But this is the point. This is the point, ladies and gentlemen. The Southern Cameroons was not party to these crushing neo-colonial Franco-Cameroon agreements. Of course not. As such, we must not continue to suffer the consequences and bear the brunt of it. On its own, France will receive worldwide condemnation and backlash if it directly asserts its will in Amazonia. Therefore, it must do so only through La République du Cameroun. That is why France is fighting to die in this war. The referendum gave the opportunity to La République du Cameroun to annex Southern Cameroons and make our resources readily available to France. That is why we are at war today. It is a war over our resources, so that France can sustain a living. These dates and days of infamy are real. We must never allow traitors to twist these facts. We must keep up the fight to free Amazonia from double bondage, directly by La République du Cameroun and indirectly by France. Now let me take you to the second part of this subject, ladies and gentlemen. The events from 2016 to 2017 that led to the restoration of our independence. Until 2016, the English system of education in the Southern Cameroons suffered regular and persistent attacks from Yaoundé. Over the years, Southern Cameroonians had to run street battles with security forces. They suffered broken limbs, imprisonment, and death to protect a system they considered far superior to what Yaoundé wanted to impose on them. Unknown to them, something worse than evil was happening in that same system unchecked until 2004. It was in the summer of that year, ladies and gentlemen, that the leadership of the Cameroon Teachers Trade Union, CATU, a union dedicated to the well-being of teachers and to the protection and preservation of the Anglo-Saxon educational system, discovered that students in their technical colleges were being taught in French, Pidgin, or street language called Franglais. This had discouraged parents from sending their children to public technical schools. In July, therefore, of 2004, CATU stumbled on a baccalaureate technical examination paper in motor mechanics. Listen to me carefully. In one of the questions, candidates were asked to, and I quote, give the functions of a candle in the engine of an automobile, end of quote. It was an examination set for Francophone learners by French-speaking teachers, poorly translated and imposed on English-speaking candidates. The advocacy to get answers and solution to this problem plunged the Teachers Union head-on into the sitting Southern Cameroon's nationalism. The more the union sought solutions to this problem, the more it became even clearer that the two systems and peoples could not live together. We persisted, the teachers persisted still, but failed because Yaoundé was bent on completing their project of assimilation. The advocacy for higher teacher training colleges and for a second Anglo-Saxon university that started in 2004 took CATU and OPTA, Union of Parent-Teacher Associations, first to the presidency of La République du Cameroon and then to the Prime Ministry in 2005 and also in 2007. The advocacy only started yielding fruits in 2009 after 5 good years of resistance. In March of that year, a union delegation led by Infamy Simon of Lade met with La République du Cameroon Higher Education Minister, threatening the holding of an all-Anglophone conference on technical education, which conference the minister was told had the potential to degenerate. The outcome of that threat, ladies and gentlemen, was a promise to expand the ENS Annex Bambeli and SAB to include technical education disciplines while waiting for colonial President Paul Biya to create the institutions officially at his leisure. This was meant to be a deception, but the union pulled a fast one on Minister Jacques Fem Ndongo. The syndicate got Ambazonians working at CRTV. They got them to announce the promise to create these institutions on CRTV 3 p.m. news. And again, on their morning safari the next day, it earned John Ba Akuro a disciplinary suspension. But once the announcement had been made, Yaoundé could no longer renege on that promise. The union further engineered motions of support to Paul Biya from CPDM section and subsection presidents in order to force Paul Biya's hand on this matter. And I quote, "That was how low we stooped to get what we wanted for our children," said Infamy Simon later said. The recruitment of both student teachers and lecturers in the newly created technical departments of ENSAB constituted another. More than 90% of the students, now listen to me, more than 90% of the students recruited in the purely technical disciplines were Francophones, while 100% of lecturers were also Francophones. When Yaoundé was challenged, the authorities declared that, and I quote, "Anglophones did not write the entrance examination," end of quote. That, of course, was a lie. Southern Cameroonians who applied to teach in the institution, some, ladies and gentlemen, with terminal qualifications, and others working towards the obtention of the same, but who were told vacancies did not exist, they testified to the union, the teachers' union. This situation continued even after the creation of the Higher Teacher Training College and the Higher Technical Teacher Training College too. The faculties of the newly created university were flooded. Ladies and gentlemen, again, the faculties of the newly created university, they were flooded with Francophones, to the extent that one was appointed Deputy Vice Chancellor in charge of academic affairs. Inconceivable, but indeed, it happened. In 2011, the union decided to seek for higher political solutions. The outcome of a workshop it organized on the subject in Boya called for the holding of a national education forum, the outcome of which the union hoped would be a clear demarcation of the two cultures and systems of education. That was in August 2011. The then colonial Prime Minister Philemon Yang granted this request promptly in September of same year. In 2012, he convened the National Education Forum for 2013 and charged the Minister of Higher Education to oversee its organization. Against all expectations, Fame Indongo ignored the orders of colonial Prime Minister Yang and strongly, vehemently refused to meet with the unions to discuss the matter. Instead, in 2013, the Minister of Secondary Education, Louis Bapes, attempted another assault. He signed a decision suppressing core science subjects like biology, chemistry, and physics from the lower classes of secondary education in a bid to francophonize the English system of education. He took a combined cartoon and tag visit to the Palace to ward off this assault. In 2013, it had become clear that the union alone could not get solutions to these problems. Recourse had to be made to the larger community of stakeholders. Tarsang Wilfred, the National Executive Secretary General of CATU, set out on a territory-wide tour to inform and to educate stakeholders in all the divisions, we now call it counties, on the stakes and challenges of the day. The reactions of parents and teachers as his team combed the territory showed that they understood. Everybody understood the stakes and the times and much more. They agreed on the needful and indefinite strike action if it came to that. The deployment of student teachers on the field for practicum was making the situation very glaring for all to see. In 2014, therefore, a Francophone Cameroonese history student teacher in GBHS Bamenda taught her students that, and I quote, the 11th of February was the date of the annexation of Le Cameroun Occidental by Le Cameroun Oriental, end of quote. In another class, a biology student teacher was asking the students, and I quote, sweep the blackboard, end of quote. The carnage was on, ladies and gentlemen. Students spent the better part of their lectures giggling. That is, for those who bothered to sit in. In September of 2015, the principal of GBHS downtown Bamenda, Mr. Nkwenti Patrick, he refused to send French-speaking student teachers to practice on English students in his school. That earned him an unending series of summonses and persecution by the colonial administration and the security services. He stood his grounds and the union backed him up. The student teachers were withdrawn from his institution, but the genocide continued in other schools unperturbed. The situation had degenerated. In December of 2015, a joint delegation of Katu and TAG succeeded to meet with Minister Jack Fem Ndongo again, this time in Bamenda. At the end of the late night meeting, the unions resolved to block the practicum, ladies and gentlemen, of second circle student teachers from Bambeli because Fem Ndongo, replying to their grievances, had rather arrogantly declared boldly that Cameroon was a bilingual country. Anybody, he said, could teach in whatever language they wanted anywhere. Fem Ndongo even threatened to bring La République du Cameroun constitutional experts to defend this crime. Students returned home for the festive holidays with flyers informing them and their parents that schools would not resume for the second term until francophone student teachers were withdrawn. Panic. The colonial governor stepped in Bamenda. He convened a meeting of stakeholders to look into the issues. At the end of the 2 days of lengthy and drawn-out discussions with the authorities of the University of Bamenda and the 2 teacher training colleges on the one hand, and the Katu, TAC and parents on the other hand, it was resolved that the university should withdraw the student teachers under contention, ladies and gentlemen, and redeploy them to the francophone sections of the bilingual colleges in Mezam for secondary general education. Why? Those for technical education will be posted to francophone technical colleges out of the southern Cameroons entirely. Strangely, but not surprisingly, of course, the Vice Chancellor and the directors of the training colleges in Bamenda refused to sign the agreement that would have set them at loggerheads with Yaoundé. The colonial governor, Lele L'Afrique in Bamenda, ladies and gentlemen, the colonial governor, he developed cold feet and rather instructed his Secretary General, Monono Absalom, to sign on their behalf. Fortunately for the unions, Fem Ndongo had invited them for a meeting on the 4th of January 2016 in Yaoundé. At the union's insistence, the Minister of Higher Education co-chaired the meeting with his counterpart of secondary education. At the end of the meeting, it was agreed, among other things, as follows. Number 1, that French-speaking student teachers would no longer carry out internship on English-speaking learners or anywhere in the southern Cameroons. Number 2, they agreed that all French-speaking teachers already teaching English-speaking learners subjects other than the French language would be withdrawn by the Minister of Secondary Education. Number 3, they agreed also that the colonial prime minister would set up an interministerial commission to prefer lasting solutions to the now perennial problems of southern Cameroon's education. the colleges of education did withdraw the French-speaking student teachers before schools resumed for the second term. The Minister of Secondary Education, on the other hand, did not keep his part of the bargain. Again, the minister did not keep his part of the bargain. According to Jean Ernest Ngale Bihebe, technical colleges would not have teachers if they withdraw the Francophone teachers. That was the argument. Worse, in August of 2016, the ministry posted more French-speaking teachers to English-speaking schools. Confronted on the matter during the beginning of year ending, the minister Bibe informed the union that you could not fabricate English-speaking teachers. That means no English-speaking teachers could be found. He deploys what the Ministry of Higher Education sends to him, he said. Of course, the Ministry of Higher Education had only Francophone teachers to send to Ambazonia because that was all they recruited for training. It was at this point that the union reached the point of no return, ladies and gentlemen. It was at this point that the National Executive Council of CATU took the decision to shut down the education industry in the southern Cameroons until they had lasting solutions. It was thus time to seek and to build alliances and partnerships with trade unions within and without the public service. Now, take note of this. Trade unions in the French system of education refuse, which means trade unions in La République du Cameroon refuse to support the cause, while private and confessional sector trade unions in the southern Cameroons readily came on board as parents first and then as teachers. The University of Boya chapter of the Higher Education Syndicate didn't have to be convinced to join the action. They came on board readily, ladies and gentlemen. But the University of Bamenda chapter of the syndicate, infested with Francophones, refused to join the action. Accosted, the business and transport sectors readily came on board to protect the education of their children. Even at this juncture, CATU kept on exploring ways and means to get the solutions needed so that they could avoid the strike action. They consulted with church leaders, virtually begging them, ladies and gentlemen, to intervene. They wrote to leading southern Cameroonian political leaders within the colonial ruling CPDM party, such as Simon Chiriachu and Peter Mafani Musonge. They met with SDF chairman John Frundi on the matter too. They assumed nothing and left nothing, and I mean nothing, to chance. Yet Yaoundé remained stubborn and adamant. That stubbornness, I want to believe, was God's doing. Ladies and gentlemen, by September 2016, the colonial prime minister still had not created the interministerial commission the ministers promised he would. Thousands more of new French-speaking teachers have been posted to our colleges to unteach the children, to discourage them and keep them away from both public, general, and technical colleges. On the occasion of World Teachers' Day, October 5 of 2016, the teachers' unions, acting in unison, informed Colonial Governor Lele Lafregen Bamenda that the strike action suspended in January would resume without prior notification if the earlier grievances were not completely addressed by the state. Taking unawares, Lele Lafregen danced on three legs. He made mockery of the unions and said the state could neither be threatened nor intimidated. By the end of the month, the teachers' unions proclaimed, ladies and gentlemen, November 21, the date for the start of an indefinite shutdown of the education industry across all of Amazonia. As usual, Yaoundé took it for granted. The system had been accustomed to blocking trade union strikes through bribery and corruption, and they thought this one too would go the same way. It mistook purely political demands for what it called, in a quote, the revendication corporatiste, in quote, excuse my French, ladies and gentlemen, syndicate or professional grievances, they said. It was God that blinded them. With the benefit of hindsight today, we can say this. By November 15, 2016, traders and drivers unions joined in to support their children and teachers of their children. They issued strike actions. Then November 21 happened. Teachers stayed home as planned. Students stayed home too. The markets were closed and township taxis were grounded in solidarity. Francophone students who wanted to go to school were intimidated by the ghosts, ladies and gentlemen, walking the streets. Parents who had not withdrawn their children from boarding schools did that after the ghosts left the streets on November 23rd. Yet, Yaoundé took it again for a joke. They said the teachers would get tired and return to the classrooms. Let me quote this. If in the wrong part and tray alcohol, in quote, these were the words of Isa Chiroma Bakari. By the end of 2 weeks, it dawned on Yaoundé that it was a serious matter after all. Even then, Yaoundé's first reaction was denial and defiance, and then attempted to sabotage. The Central Committee of the colonial ruling CPDM party dispatched two prime ministerial delegations to Boya and to Bamenda to tell the people that the teachers' unions were lying and that they had no problems. The two delegations, led by former Prime Minister Peter Mafani Musonge to Boya and Philemon Yang to Bamenda, met with severe resistance, ladies and gentlemen. The youth, whose future the system had ambushed, came out to resist Peter Mafani Musonge and Philemon Yang in Boya and in Bamenda. The confrontations in Bamenda on December 8, 2016 led to 5 deaths. The first being the famous Julius Akum. Blood had been spilled. The tree of freedom had been watered again with human blood. The blood of these children and thousands who have died today, ladies and gentlemen, has not stopped asking for justice. It will not stop. It will not stop until Homeland is set free, until the blue and white striped flag is erected permanently in Buea. By December 2016, it had become clear to Yaoundé that a semblance of talking was needed. The colonial prime minister finally created the promised interministerial commission to look into the grievances. Typically, he placed it under the chairmanship of Jack Fem Ndongo, the same minister whose government department created the problems in the first place, and who had unashamedly told the unions in December 2015 that Cameroon was a bilingual country, and so teachers could teach in whatever language they choose, irrespective of the learners, their grades, and their disciplines. The teachers' unions refused to show up at the meeting and requested a change of both the chair of the commission and the venue. The opposition to the venue was informed by the incivilities and physical humiliation visited on common law lawyers in Buea, as we know it, and in Bamenda earlier in November 2016. If this could happen to lawyers on their home turf, how much more would Yaoundé do to common teachers? The unions feared. Security was at risk. Tension kept rising across the national territory, of Ambazonia. And the load of grievances kept on increasing, ladies and gentlemen. By the time the colonial prime minister, Philemon Yang himself, descended from his very highly exalted pedestal to meet with the unions in Bamenda in late December, the consortium had been formed. The colonial prime minister refused to receive the consortium as a body. He met with the various components thereof differently, that means on different occasions, in units, but all were unyielding. They refused to yield. It was during the meeting with teachers and parents unions that Mr. Philemon Yang declared that, and I quote, "The government could not withdraw French-speaking teachers from English-speaking classrooms," end of quote, because, according to him, that action would, and I quote again, "disturb social cohesion," end of quote, whatever he meant by social cohesion. The unions informed him that social cohesion had already been disturbed by what Francophones were doing to unsuspecting learners. But the Prime Minister, Philemon Yang, would not be moved. He would not yield. The negotiations ended on the second night, with Philemon Yang promising to create within 48 hours a new structure for negotiations that would meet again in Bamenda. The conditions that the unions gave him to motivate them to suspend the strike were not met. Instead of announcing a special recruitment of student teachers of Southern Cameroon's origin, the Prime Minister, Philemon Yang, ordered for the recruitment of 1,000 English-speaking teachers. No, not at all. 1,000 bilingual science and technical teachers, ladies and gentlemen. This was interpreted to mean the recruitment of more Francophone teachers, saying that there was no college where bilingual science and technical teachers were trained in La République du Cameroon. Consequently, the new interministerial ad hoc committee met amidst the raging school shutdown. During the negotiations, The system wanted to make it appear like the southern zone, as usual. Listen to me carefully here. They wanted to make it appear like, again, like the southern zone had no issues, no concerns at all with the assimilation plans and schemes. It was in trying to execute this plot that Philemon Yang's office deliberately omitted southern zoners from the first session of the ad hoc committee in Bamenda. But the teachers refused to be divided, and they staged a walkout. I note here, ladies and gentlemen, that only at the beginning of this week, we saw Dion Ngute in Fako trying to play the same cards that Philemon Yang played then, to divide and to rule us. They always want us to believe that southern zoners are not the troublemakers. Troublemakers are the Bamenda people, so they say. They think they can tempt, seduce, and cower the southerners. They hope that southern zoners will lay down tools and back out of the struggle. So Bamenda will say, what is the need? What is the need fighting? And then lay down tool also. Fellow Ambazonians, the trade unions refuse then to be divided. We must not be divided now, not when we have come this close to freedom. We must continue to stand as one man, one power against all odds. This must be our resolve. What happened after the second ad hoc committee meeting aggravated the situation. Yaoundé had no plans to execute the outcome of the negotiations. All they cared was about the strike suspension, the suspension of the strike. To frustrate the struggle thereafter, there was a plan to eliminate the Executive Secretary General of the Union, Tassang Wilfred, and to blame his death on Southern Cameroonians who supposedly would have been disappointed with him for, in a quote, selling out. The colonial military prosecutor in said Yaoundé made this disclosure to Tassang Wilfred himself upon their arrival there after the Nera Hotel abductions in Nigeria. Tassang Wilfred says, and I quote, "He wanted to know from me why I escaped. I told him my life was in danger, and I reminded him of the January 13 assassination attempt on my life and the arrest of Agbo Bala and Dr. Fondem Neba. He said it was my people." Now this is Tassang Wilfred speaking, ladies and gentlemen. He said it was my people who wanted to kill me. I asked him why my people would do that, seeing that I was working for them. Or was that what Yaoundé had planned to tell the people after my death? Tassang Wilfred asked. As God would have it, ladies and gentlemen, Yaoundé forgot to pull out the ambush squad that he had put in place to eliminate Comrade Tassang Wilfred. Consequently, 3 bike riders were gunned down at night, the same night when they met upstation Bamenda. A convoy of bike riders had a car, and a car was mistaken for that of Tassang Wilfred, as it happened the previous night, whereas he had been delayed in the governor's office by John Frundi and Barrister Bernard Mona of late. The reaction of the consortium was to call for a 2-day ghost town in protest. This meant that the scheduled meetings could no longer hold. Confused and frustrated, Yaoundé banned the consortium and the SCNC and withdrew from the negotiations. Orders were given to arrest consortium leaders, Barrister Agbo Bala and Dr. Fontaine-Niba were precipitately picked up by the colonial governor in Boya before the time given by Yaoundé. Alerted of the arrest, Tarzan Wilfred went underground and subsequently escaped to Nigeria in February of 2017. Others, including Barrister Bere Yusufai, Barrister Eyambe Elias, Dr. Ingala Info, they joined. It was from Nigeria that on behalf of the consortium, Tarzan Wilfred endorsed the restoration option of this struggle. A gathering of frontline independence restoration movements met in Nigeria in late February 2017, and Skakov was birthed. The people had come together, and no matter what happened, and is happening, ladies and gentlemen, the restoration drive is on its wheels, and it is unstoppable. As we commemorate this October 1st, 2021, Ambazonia should take stock. It is time to calculate our losses and to project where we would have been if our education system did not suffer multiple ambushes from Yaoundé. The decision to rise up, ladies and gentlemen, to possess the possession of our children was the right thing to do, and that we cannot pull away from it now. Not at all. Not after coming this close. Not after 400 plus villages and communities have been razed to the ground. Not after more than 30,000 people have been killed by French Cameroon terrorists. The situation that awaits us, if we fail to realize this dream, is much worse than you can imagine. Listen to me, Ambazonia. La République du Cameroon presently has as many of its citizens as can in our territory, and they will feel all the positions in Ambazonia if we surrender. Again, if we surrender. This time, they will be doing so as Anglophones, not Francophones. Don't we already have them in the public service, in government, in the private sector, speaking for us? Ladies and gentlemen, Francis Wete, Felix Mbayu, Mimi Mefo, they are speaking for us, right? These are only the tip of the iceberg. The worst lies ahead for our children and their generations if we refuse or fail to deliver. Ambazonians should therefore not be misled by unionists passing around as federalists. Federation is not an option to be considered. That time is long gone. How can anybody dream of eating their dog's vomit? Does it even make sense to ask for that which Yaoundé said in 2016 was inconceivable, and even up to now is not pretending to concede to? Should we fight? Should we die? Should we suffer exile and imprisonment only to be accepted as second-class citizens? We are not cursed people. Again, we are not cursed people. We cannot accept it. Ambazonia, We cannot give up. We must not give up on the future of our children. For if we do, tomorrow shall not be as gentle on us as it was with furniture. We are the educated ones, the learned generation. We are the doctors and experts. We are the lawyers and the economists. We are the political scientists and all you can name. That furniture, Muna and Dr. Endele were not and did not have. No, we cannot fail. We must not fail. Above all, how can we fail when we have God on our side? For the scripture says, and I quote, if he be with us, if he stands with us, if he supports our cause, and walk along with us as he walked with Moses to the promised land, nobody, no power, and no potentate can overcome our joint strength. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my researcher, whose name I cannot mention to you here today. Happy Independence Day. God bless you all.